The day I walked into the courtroom, my daughter stood at the plaintiff's table, and she was the one who had signed the petition asking the court to declare me incompetent. The entire room burst into laughter. The press called me the mad old man from Clayton Hill Farm, but they didn't know that the man they were mocking once held the gavel in this very court, the man once known as Chief Judge Elias Vance. I had been silent for 12 months, not out of fear, but because I wanted to show them that when justice is sold, it will find its own way to buy back its dignity. And when truth walks in, every lie must bow its head. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, ever been humiliated just for being too kind, stay with me until the end of this story, because sometimes one correctly signed piece of paper is stronger than 1,000 late apologies. Leave a single dot if you believe that justice never dies, and hit subscribe, because I'll tell you true stories where silence isn't weakness. It's the sharpest counterstrike of those who've been betrayed. I pushed open the heavy wooden door of courtroom number 3 with a hand roughened by years of farm work. My faded denim shirt was stained with a trace of chalky soil, my short boots worn at the heel, and I still held the brown hat I'd carried for the 45-minute drive from Clayton Hill to downtown Atlanta. The cold air from the vents hit my face, the smell of polished wood mixed with new paper, and the faint metallic sting from the detector frames. Overhead, the temporary studio lights for the morning news poured down white light like surgical blades, clean, straight, leaving no room for illusion. To my left, 2 WSB TV reporters adjusted the lav mic on their anchor. The preview screen flashed the caption in crisp letters: Fulton County Probate Court, Guardianship Hearing, Emergency. My name, Elias Vance, stood alone beside the word Respondent. The camera swept across and paused on me for half a second, inspecting me like an old artifact. To the right, the public benches were packed. Whispers rippled like water through the wooden rows. Whose father is that? Which farm's he from? Why is there a TV? I took 2 more steps and met a smile. Serena rose from the plaintiff's bench. Her dark blue dress fitted neatly, hair pinned high, exposing pearl earrings. My daughter tilted her head toward her lawyer, lips curling slightly as one might pluck a thin musical note. A short, sharp smile, enough to slice through the softest spot. Darius, her husband, leaned his hip against the table, scanning me as if I were a worthless block of marble in his stone workshop, then shook his head with a small, amused snort. That sound was louder to me than the hum of the air conditioning, as if the room had shrunk just to let that contempt reach my eardrum. A young man in the back row raised his phone, camera tilted upward. Old Farmer, in court. The caption popped up instantly. The red live icon blinked amid a flood of comments. Crazy old man? Guardianship drama. Atlanta's hot this morning. On the clerk's desk, the digital clock flipped to 8:59. I stopped, set my hat on my lap, and sat in the chair labeled Respondent, a title that tasted more bitter than overnight coffee. Serena leaned just enough for me to see the crack of dried lipstick at her lip corner. She bent close to her lawyer, speaking loud enough for a few words to spill out. He won't understand. Just finished today. Darius didn't bother to whisper. He slouched back, hands clasped behind his head, like a man watching a basketball game he already knew the score to. When his eyes swept across me again, that detached look was identical to what I used to see in men who entered my courtroom armed with the confidence of money, the kind that buys other people's silence. All rise, the bailiff's voice rang. I stood by reflex. The side door opened. A figure in a black robe stepped in. I'd seen that gait countless times in these halls, back when I wore the same robe, but years were long enough to make everything unfamiliar. The man holding the gavel today, Preston Ellis, walked past the clerk's desk, fingertips brushing the surface as if reconnecting his eyes to the space of authority before him. He sat, shuffled his papers, and spoke in that even, resonant tone shaped by thousands of such mornings. Case number PR 241138. Petition for temporary guardianship over Mr. Elias Vance. Filed by Ms. Serena Vance Hayes. Parties present. Serena's attorney rose first to introduce himself. I followed, saying only, "Present, Your Honor." My voice was flat, a lake at dawn holding still against the wind, not because I was calm, but because I knew one ripple would be mistaken for confusion. Preston's eyes dropped to the file. I saw his hand, the one holding the gavel, hesitate half a beat, a pause only someone who had once sat behind that bench would notice. He read a few more lines, slower now, as though each word were shrinking on the page. Then he lifted his head. Our eyes met through the clear glass of that silent moment. Some recognitions cut straight to the bone, needing no polite skin. I saw his pupils widen like someone flinging open a window at the scent of a forgotten room. The color drained slightly from his face. His hand near the gavel trembled. His lips moved barely, soft enough for most to think he'd coughed. But I heard it clearly. Good Lord, it's him. Serena frowned slightly and turned to her lawyer. What did he say? Not sure, the lawyer replied, eyes lowered to the file. She only knew I had worked at the court when I was younger, some low-level official or legal advisor. I had never told her that I was the one who once sat on the bench. To her, that past was nothing more than a few dusty certificates hanging on the wall of the old wooden house in Clayton Hill. And perhaps that was my greatest mistake, letting my daughter believe her father was just a minor clerk, not a man who once held the gavel that decided people's fates. The room stood still, not the kind of stillness ordered by the bailiff, but the kind that happens when everyone stops breathing at the same time. 1 second, then 2, and heads slowly turned toward me. I did nothing except straighten my back by half a notch, set my hat neatly in place, and look directly at the bench. On the plaintiff's side, Serena's smile froze like a drop of cooking oil meeting cold water. Darius's hands fell from behind his head. His chair made a small snapping sound as it hit the floor too quickly. Preston stood up, a movement he rarely made before declaring anything serious. He took 1 step forward, stopped, then returned to his seat, as if remembering that every step he took now was being recorded in the record. His voice tightened. Court will take a 10-minute recess. The gavel struck lightly, not to warn, but to remind himself that he was still on the bench, not inside a memory. Noise broke loose like a flood breaching its banks. The WSB TV camera light stayed red, though the lens trembled slightly. Perhaps even the cameraman shivered. At the back of the room, the young man live-streaming zoomed in closer on my face. The comments thickened. Wait, who is that? Not a farmer? Chief Judge? A single name began to appear among the comments, then more and more. Vance. Serena turned to her lawyer, whispering with the voice of someone who had just found a shard of glass in her mouth. He knows him? The lawyer swallowed hard. Just a name match. Must be. Darius no longer whispered. He leaned over the table's edge and threw down a line loud enough for me to hear, soft enough for the mic to miss. Whoever you are, you're still old. Old means losing. I turned my face toward him, offering no reply. Words like that don't need an answer. Time will do the talking. My eyes drifted to the side door where the black robe had just vanished. Some memories never age. The smell of freshly opened paper, the scrape of a clerk's chair, the chill of granite under one's shoes. They all returned suddenly to my tongue, and I remembered living here, not as today's potential ward, but as the man who once held the key to order. 35 years on a chair that had no backrest to lean on. The bailiff invited both sides to step into the hall during recess. I didn't move. I wanted a minute alone to let the last shards of glass fall. Serena paused in the aisle, looking at me. No smile now. Only 2 dark circles of overdone makeup suddenly exposed the fatigue she had hidden for years. Pop, she said softly, as if testing whether the old words still fit her mouth. I looked down at my hands. A streak of dry soil stuck between my fingers, still unwashed from fixing the chicken coop pipe that morning. I nodded slightly, my tone as even as the grain of wood. You can call me that, if you still see me as your father. I raised my eyes to hers, where the studio light reflected into two pale rings. But don't call the courtroom a kitchen, I said slowly, each word heavy. This isn't where you mix law with ambition or stir morality with money. Here, everything must be baked with truth, not with tricks. Serena froze. The sentence made the air around her congeal. I saw her shoulders tremble slightly, not sure if from cold or from realizing, for the first time in years, that I had just taken from her the privilege of lying without being named. She hesitated a beat, then walked away. Darius followed, his chest puffed up like a man inhaling too much air to hide an empty heart. The WSB TV camera lowered. The cameraman stretched his arm, weary, but the light stayed on. I heard the anchor's voice drop. An unexpected development. We'll update after the 10-minute break. Half the room emptied. The sound of the chair creaks, file folders snapping shut, pens tapping wood. I placed my hat back on my knee and took a deep breath until the scent of linseed oil reached my lungs. The feeling of being mocked on camera burned hot and thin, like a blue gas flame. But behind that flame was something else, the stillness of a scalpel before it meets skin. I had once held that scalpel, in the figurative sense of my old profession. I knew when to lower it and when to stop midair. 10 minutes can stretch far longer when you count each tick of the clock's minute hand. As the hand moved one notch, I heard the side door open again. Preston returned, his eyes now the glassy color of difficult judgment. He sat, scanning each face. When his gaze came back to me, I straightened slightly, to let him see the only thing I needed him to remember. I was still me. Court is back in session, he said, voice slow and firm as a stone edge. Before proceeding with the petition for temporary guardianship, the court must clarify a preliminary matter. His eyes met the row where I sat, then shifted to the microphone as if speaking to the record itself. The court confirms the respondent's identity, Mr. Elias Vance, former judge of this very court. No one breathed, or if they did, the sound was lost beyond the walls. The young man live streaming dropped his phone. The screen spun once before steadying, the red live light still blinking. The comment feed exploded into letters I could no longer read. Serena collapsed into her chair like someone slipping off a slick rung. Darius turned his head slowly, as if trying to pull his neck out of an invisible noose. I heard my own voice rise without thought. Your Honor, I am present and fully competent to represent myself. Preston nodded slightly, a motion that was both procedure and memory. He set the gavel down, his hand leaving the wooden handle like a surgeon releasing the scalpel after the first incision. Noted, he said. The court will ensure due process and consider all necessary conflicts. For now, we begin with the truth. You want to know why I, the man who once sat on that very bench, walked in here wearing a faded denim shirt, letting my own daughter mock me on camera, because every scar has its birthday. And this story began with a morning phone call 3 months ago, when Atlanta still smelled of the first rain of the season and an old name, Solomon, suddenly became a will. I will tell you. But first, let's allow the door behind us to close completely. We're going back to that day. 3 months earlier, Atlanta had just entered its season of light rain. Each morning, mist drifted over the red hills of Clayton Hill, wrapping around my tin roof like the breath of the earth itself. I lived quietly in the wooden house I had rebuilt with my own hands after leaving the profession. A small garden, a few tomato rows, some chickens, and a long porch where one could sit watching the rain for hours without saying a word. The only thing that remained from my old life was a wooden box I kept on a bookshelf, holding a few framed certificates and several letters from the only man I ever considered a brother, Solomon. That morning, while I was tying the irrigation line, the phone rang. The screen showed the name, Serena. My hand hesitated slightly because my daughter did not call often. Since she got married, most of our conversations have been through email. I wiped the mud from my hand onto my pants and answered. Pop, I have news. Her voice was dry, concise. What is it, Serena? Uncle Solomon passed away last night at his home in Marietta. I stood silent for a few seconds. In my head, all that remained was the sound of water leaking from the end of the hose. That name, even after so many years without seeing him, still tightened my chest. Passed away? Why didn't anyone call me sooner? I just found out this morning, too. His lawyer contacted me because I'm the closest relative in the city. Her tone remained flat, as if she were reading a statement. A lawyer? I asked. What did they say? There are some matters regarding the estate. He left quite a substantial amount. Real estate, investment accounts, and some suburban land. You'll need to sign some documents. What documents? I still couldn't believe I had just been told my brother had died, and she was already talking about property. Just legal procedures, Pop. We'll go over the details when you come to Atlanta. I'll send you the lawyer's address. Her voice didn't tremble. Not a word of condolence, not a breath of grief. When the call ended, I stood still for a long time, listening to the rain fall evenly on the roof. Water streamed down the edge of the porch, mixing with mud, carrying away the jasmine petals I had picked that morning. 3 days later, I arrived at Marietta Funeral Home. The funeral was brief, city-style efficient. Just a few bank employees, a young lawyer, and a few of Solomon's neighbors. The casket stood in the middle of the cold room, surrounded by silence. Serena wore a black dress, standing beside Darius. He was still on his phone, nodding absently and typing as if coordinating a meeting. I walked closer, placed my hand on the oak surface, and whispered, Rest easy, brother. I came late, as always. Solomon and I had been two halves of a vow. When our father died, I was 17 and he was 22. He quit college to work, paying my way through law school. Every night he wrote letters, urging me to hold my principles. Justice before gold. That single phrase made me choose the bench while he went into business. We took different paths, but shared the same creed. Never let money teach law to man. By the time our mother passed, I was in the judiciary, and he had become a small businessman, then a larger one. Yet every year he still came back to share a cup of black coffee with me. Elias, he once said, if I go first one day, what I'll leave you won't be money. It'll be a reason to keep believing in your own integrity. I laughed then, thinking he was joking. Now, standing in that bright funeral hall, those words became the only will I truly believed. After the service, Serena pulled me aside, her tone still cold. Uncle Solomon's lawyer wants to meet you. They need to confirm some details. Now? I asked. Can't it wait until after the service? They said there's a signing deadline. Darius also wants to finish early so he can meet an investor in Midtown. Investor? I turned to Darius. He shrugged, smirking. Just a small pitch, Pop. Solomon had promised to invest in my company once. Maybe we'll pick that project back up. The words caught in my throat. He didn't look at the coffin, only at his watch. Serena touched his arm lightly, signaling him to stop talking. Come on, Dad, she said. The car's waiting. The lawyer's office sat inside a glass tower near Buckhead. The room gleamed, filled with the mix of cologne and air conditioning. The lawyer's name was Matthew Reed, younger than I expected. He stood to shake my hand and opened his briefcase. First, my condolences to the family. Mr. Solomon was an esteemed client. According to his will, his entire estate, estimated at $2,800,000, is left to Mr. Elias Vance. I looked up. Serena did too. Her face slackened for half a second, then froze. To my father? She asked. Yes, entirely. Mr. Solomon had no spouse or children, and as per the notarized will from last year, he designated a single heir. His brother. The air in the room stopped moving. Darius frowned, shooting Serena a glance. I saw a flicker in my daughter's eyes. Not grief, but calculation. A cold glint, sharp as a knife's reflection in glass. But my father lives out in the countryside, Serena said, her tone shifting. He doesn't have experience managing large assets. That doesn't affect inheritance rights, Matthew replied. However, if he needs legal or investment assistance, we, Darius cut in confidently, can help ensure the estate retains its full value. I said nothing. I could see the game clearly, and it had started the moment Serena called to inform me. The lawyer closed the file and handed me an envelope containing a copy of the will. I thanked him and stood. Serena took my hand, but her fingers were cold and hard as the granite walls around us. "Pop, I'll help you handle all the paperwork," she said. "You just sign when the documents arrive." "Sign?" I asked. "You know I've never signed anything without reading it all." She smiled faintly and didn't answer. That afternoon, I returned to my guest house nearby. Outside the window, Atlanta buzzed with life, but all I saw was a blurred gray haze. I opened the envelope. The will was simple. To my brother, Elias Vance, for the years he gave to truth when others sold it. Below the line was Solomon's familiar signature, the ink bold like a nod from across the grave. I folded the paper, set it on the table, and wondered why Serena hadn't shed a single tear. Perhaps to her, death was just another contract closed. For me, every time I closed my eyes, I still saw my brother's smile under the yellow cafe light, the man who once taught me that justice is the one thing never up for sale. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand shook, spilling it over the table. One drop landed on the name Elias Vance, spreading like diluted blood. Outside, an ambulance wailed past, its sirens stretching into the evening. I knew that tomorrow, when I returned to Clayton Hill, I would carry not just an inheritance, but the final test of my life, the test between money and morality. And I did not yet know that somewhere in this same city, my own daughter was already planning each step to turn that test into a real courtroom. Friday afternoon, rain poured hard over Atlanta. It beat against the rows of oaks along Peachtree Avenue, like snapped guitar strings flailing wildly. I drove my old pickup through the glistening streets and stopped in front of the white mansion standing out in Buckhead, the home of my daughter Serena and her husband Darius. The house was faced with imported marble, 2 tall columns rising like a small Greek temple. Each polished stone shone so brightly I could see my reflection in it, aged, damp, and fading under the years of silence. The door opened. Darius appeared, white shirt buttoned to the collar, a glass of red wine in hand, his smile dimmer than the hallway light. "Pop," he called out, louder than needed. "You finally made it. Driving in this rain isn't easy, huh?" I replied simply. "I've driven through heavier rain than this, Darius." He shrugged, stepping aside. "Come in. Serena's setting the table." Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors streaked with gold, paintings covering the walls, a long dining table draped in satin, the scent of wine mixed with vanilla candles. Serena walked out of the kitchen carrying a salad plate, her movements graceful, her gaze a blend of courtesy and control. "Pop, I was afraid you wouldn't come." "You invited me, so I came," I said, sitting down and setting my hat on the chair beside me. "But I don't know what this dinner means beyond the food." She smiled, a fragile smile already rehearsed with an explanation. "It's simple, Pop. We're family. After everything with Uncle Solomon, I just want clarity." Darius poured wine and slid a glass toward me. "Pop, I heard you just inherited quite a fortune. $2,800,000, right? Any plans for it at your age?" I looked at him, voice calm. "Yes, keep it as it is. Invest it in something money can't buy." He chuckled, wine swirling in the glass. "And what would that be, Pop?" "Faith." The air hung still for a few seconds. Serena broke the silence. "Dad, do you realize how fast the market changes now? Darius and I are launching a new investment fund. Our clients are all long-term visionaries. If you allow us, we can help move your inheritance into a trust fund for stable growth. You'd just need to sign a simple power of attorney form." I looked up. The light reflected off the white paper, gleaming like a thin blade. "Power of attorney?" I asked. "Yes," Serena said softly. "Just a form that lets me represent you in managing the assets. You'll still be the heir, but all the procedures, transfers, and investments, I'll handle them." "You think I need someone to handle things for me?" "Pop, you don't fully understand modern finance," Darius cut in, half joking, half mocking. "Back in your day, people still kept money in safes." I set the wine glass down without drinking. "Perhaps. But I do know this. You only hand over the keys to someone who's kept the house clean, not to someone who's once lit a fire inside it." Serena sighed, forcing a smile. "Pop, why do you always think we want something from you?" "Because I've read your eyes, Serena, and they no longer speak in the language of trust." Darius laughed, breaking the tension. "Pop, you're too suspicious. This is just business. Serena and I are trying to protect you from risk. An old man living alone on a farm, anyone could take advantage of you. We're the new generation. We understand how money works." I looked around the house. Every painting, every plant, every decoration radiated the kind of wealth that didn't come from sweat, but from someone else's pocket. "If you truly understood money, Darius," I said, "you wouldn't let it become the measure of human worth." His smile vanished completely. Serena quickly changed the subject. "Pop, let's not argue. I just need your signature to complete the process. Tomorrow, Lawyer Reed will send the original document. You just need to sign here." She placed the paper on the table. I studied it for a long moment, then pushed it gently back. "I've read enough documents in my life, Serena, and the first lesson my profession taught me was this: never sign something until you've asked why it exists." The air thickened. The sound of rain outside grew louder. Darius set his glass down with a faint thud. "Seems you still like doing things the old way, Pop, but you'll see. Not everyone lives forever inside their memories." "True," I said, "but at least my memories don't require lies to survive." Serena stood, gathering plates. "If you don't want to cooperate, fine. I just want you to know, when the time comes, people might question your competence." I looked at her, my gaze slow and heavy as an oath. "What did you just say?" "I'm only being honest, Pop. Haven't you been forgetting things lately?" That question struck like an indictment. I understood now. They had paved the path already. Incompetence, temporary guardianship, authorization, all wrapped neatly in concern. I stood and reached for my coat. "Dinner was good, Serena, but I no longer see it as a family meal." I walked out of the dining room, down the long hallway flooded with yellow light. The rain outside hammered the glass like the heartbeat of someone holding back anger. I planned to leave immediately, but the downpour was relentless. A maid came out with an umbrella, her voice worried. "Mr. Vance, it's pouring hard. Perhaps you should stay the night?" I nodded. "Yes, just one night." Serena said nothing, leaning against the doorframe, her eyes drifting like someone already calculating. Darius smiled politely. "There's a guest room upstairs, Pop. Rest there tonight. We'll talk more tomorrow." I didn't answer. I simply walked up the stairs, my footsteps slow and heavy, each one sounding like thunder rolling inside my chest. Before reaching the last step, I turned back. "I once taught you that honor is a person's final asset. If you ever wish to hold a pen over my life, remember, ink doesn't just stain paper, it stains blood." Serena didn't answer. She only looked down, like someone avoiding their own reflection in a mirror. I closed the guest room door behind me and sat on the long chair by the window. A flash of lightning illuminated the entire room, revealing my face in the glass, aged, tired. That night, the rain kept falling thick as a silver curtain outside the window. I slept in the upstairs guest room. Serena said it was to make things easier for tomorrow's talk, but I knew the only thing they still wanted to discuss was money. The room was cold, white and empty like a hospital ward. I lay on the bed, listening to the clock, ticking slowly until voices rose from downstairs. At first it was laughter, soft, broken, then a conversation that thinned but sharpened like a whetted blade. "He's really old," Darius said. "Even walking he shakes. Spent his whole life on laws, doesn't know a damn thing about money." Serena replied, her voice colder than the wine. "He's not stupid, just outdated. Men like my father belong to the era of fax machines and fountain pens. He still thinks honor can pay bills." Darius snorted. "The only thing honor ever pays for is a nursing home chair." Both of them laughed quietly. I heard the faint clink of glasses. Serena continued. "He still believes everyone's as decent as he once imagined. Still reads every line of a contract. Still says, 'Never sign what you don't understand.' Pathetic. If Mom were alive, she'd be tired of that antique morality too." "Exactly," Darius said. "What's the point of integrity if it doesn't earn interest? Look, $2,800,000 just sitting there. One sheet of paper, one signature, and done. A lifetime of talking about justice, and all it takes is one power of attorney's signature for us to teach him what reality means." Serena poured more wine, her tone dry as metal. "If he doesn't sign, we'll make the court force him to. You're right, one medical evaluation for incompetence, and it's over. We can ask Dr. Adams for a certificate. He owes your mother a few favors. He won't refuse." Darius nodded, the light glinting off his face. "Good. Let him think he's still sharp. When the papers arrive, he'll realize justice doesn't save anyone when the money's gone." Serena laughed, her voice trembling slightly in the wine. "Justice before gold. That's what he told me when I was 10. Now I see gold always wins. Justice is for people who can't make money." "I like hearing that," Darius said, smiling. "Now it's just the two of us, and the future. No father, only opportunity." Their glasses met with a dry, hollow chime. I stood halfway down the stairs, every word sinking into my chest like molten lead. They weren't family anymore. They were partners, rehearsing their roles in a calculated theft. I didn't know how long I'd been gripping the railing until my fingers burned. Serena's voice came again, low but precise. "Remember to lock the accounts as soon as the papers are done. Don't give him time to move anything. For a man like him, losing what he values most is the right punishment." "And what does he value most?" Darius asked. "His belief that no one dares to touch him. Let him learn how to bow, for the first time in his life." Their laughter rose again, blending with the rain tapping the windows. I stepped back toward my room, each movement heavy as stone. In the mirror, my face was pale, but my eyes were brighter than ever. I wasn't angry nor shaking, only filled with one single feeling, the silence of justice before it strikes. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Atlanta seemed washed clean, but not my heart. I drove back to Clayton Hill, the small ridge south of the city where I had lived these past 8 years. In the old wooden house I had rebuilt with my own hands after Martha passed. The wet road blurred the morning light, streaks of water running down my windshield like memories that would not quite dry. My phone rang repeatedly on the way home. Serena's name flashed on the screen, twice, then 3 times. I watched that red light in the silence. Finally, a message appeared. "Pop, see you at 10 today. I want to talk more about the power of attorney. It'll only take a few minutes." I placed the phone face down on the table. No reply, not a single word. Across the city, they were probably sitting in that white kitchen, wondering why I kept quiet. They did not know that my silence was the answer. I did not need to argue or shout. I only needed to leave and let the truth find its way back. I walked into my house. The scent of old coffee still lingered, and light slipped through the blinds and hit the dusty bookshelf. I set the keys on the table and sat down on the wooden chair. My hand trembled slightly. All last night, Serena and Darius's voices had echoed in my head like a pin stuck in me. Justice is only for those who don't know how to make money. I looked up at an old photograph on the wall. 3 of us, me, Solomon, and our father, standing before the Fulton County Courthouse years ago. In our father's hand was the small wooden gavel he used at community meetings, a symbol of faith. The law begins with the justice in a person's heart. I rose and walked to my study. The small room creaked underfoot. The old mahogany desk and a gray steel filing cabinet stood where I had left them. In the lowest drawer sat an oak box I had not opened in years since I left the bench. I placed it on the desk. Dust lay thick. My fingers found the cold latch. I opened it. The hinge sighed. Inside, everything was as before. The faded black robe, an ID card with the faint letters Chief Judge E. Vance, a silver Mont Blanc with flaked lacquer, several photographs with former colleagues, and beneath them a dark gold envelope, the paper edge worn, addressed in that familiar slanted hand. Elias, open only if truly needed. I slowly tore the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Solomon, in blue ink, his handwriting firm and straight as his character. Brother, if you are reading this, perhaps I am no longer sitting with you on the porch. I write these lines while I am well, because I have a feeling. One day you may need to remember the man you once were. I know your life is made of endless court sessions, where justice and trust are constantly weighed. But Elias, do not let anyone steal your dignity. Dignity is the one thing that cannot be priced with money. If anyone tries to make you forget who you are, remember, justice is not inside the courthouse. It is in the hands that keep their backs straight. I leave you what I have, not because you are the only relative, but because I trust you will keep these things in the right place and not let them become weapons in the hands of the greedy. I set the letter on the desk and sat in silence. The line, "Do not let anyone steal your dignity," was carved into the wood. In that moment, I no longer saw myself as a humiliated old man, but as the one who most truly understood standing tall. I slipped on the old robe and looked at myself in the mirror. Black, worn with a small tear at the wrist, yet it still fit. In the dim light, the man in the mirror was no longer Pop, the tomato grower, but Chief Judge Elias Vance of 35 years of justice. I nodded quietly, as if Solomon were watching. At the same time, in downtown Atlanta, in the glass tower of the Fulton Civil Authority, Serena sat in the office of Reed and Cole. Her face was cold, lips pressed tight. Before her lay a thick file. Petition for guardianship and financial protection, Vance Estate. Lawyer Reed flipped through the pages. Are you sure? This will be public. The press may ask. Serena answered quickly, without hesitation. I only do this for Dad's safety. He is declining mentally and needs a legal guardian, and I am his only daughter. Darius sat beside her, smiling softly, his hand on his wife's shoulder. Let the press think what they want, dear. They love the story of the dutiful daughter protecting her aging father. Those reporters eat on sentiment. Reed signed the form and sealed it. Done. Tomorrow morning the Fulton court will accept the filing. They stood. Serena looked out through the glass at the damp day. In the reflection she saw her own face, cold, emotionless. Darius murmured, When everything belongs to us, you'll thank me. Serena gave a slight nod, but in the bottom of her eyes there was a flicker. Not regret, but fear. That evening I turned on the old radio in the kitchen. WSB carried the anchor's voice. Breaking news from Fulton Court. Darius and Serena Hayes, well-known figures in the real estate sector, have filed for guardianship over Serena's father, Mr. Elias Vance, a former judicial official of Georgia. Sources say Mr. Vance is showing signs of cognitive decline after inheriting millions of dollars from his late brother. The story attracts attention because of Mr. Vance's past. He once served as chief judge of the Fulton County Court. I sat still, fingers tightening on the coffee cup. The broadcast repeated phrases, former official, cognitive decline, guardianship, like hammers hitting the old bench of my life's justice. I turned off the radio and stepped onto the porch. The sky had lightened. The smell of wet earth rose after the rain. In the distance, a freight train sounded through the valley. I reopened Solomon's letter and read the last line. If they corner you, remember, justice does not shout. It waits until the mist clears. I folded the letter and placed it back in the box with the old ID. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the first line after many years of blank pages. March 12th, Clayton Hill. They chose their strike. Now it is time for me to choose how to respond. The oil lamp flickered on the desk. I looked out toward the dark hill where pines stood in the wind. In that breeze I heard Solomon's voice, soft but resolute. Don't let anyone steal your dignity. I answered quietly, my voice dry and clear. I promise, brother, I promise. And from that moment, the silent war began. That morning, the landline rang 3 times. I had just set my coffee cup down when a woman's voice came through, husky and familiar, like the scent of old coffee. Judge, it's me, Lorraine Beaumont. I froze for a moment. That name pulled me back 20 years, to the old courtroom, the stacks of case files, and the blonde clerk who always called me Judge instead of Sir. It's been a long time, I replied. You doing well, Lorraine? Wouldn't go that far, she said, a trace of bitterness in her tone. But I read the papers this morning. They say your daughter's filed for guardianship. I couldn't believe it. The whole city's talking. I stayed silent. On the line, I could hear her faint breathing. I still have something you need to see, she continued. Old files on Darius Hayes. Case from 2015. I think it's connected. You're sure? I asked. Absolutely. And if I'm right, they're running the same play. Only this time, you're the target. I looked out the window. Sunlight fell across the porch roof. My voice dropped low. So what are you planning, Lorraine? Brew some coffee, Judge. I'm driving up to Clayton Hill. That afternoon, Clayton Hill glowed with sun. Light sifted through the pines, flashing across the porch where I sat with a half-cold cup of coffee. I was rereading Solomon's letter when an old engine rumbled up the slope. A beige sedan stopped at the gate. The door opened and a small, slightly stooped figure stepped out. Before I could rise, a warm, raspy voice called out, Thought you'd forgotten my name by now. I smiled. Lorraine Beaumont, my former clerk, who had worked beside me for over 20 years at the Fulton Court. The day I retired, she had packed my final case files, aligning every notebook, every ruling as if she were filing away a life. Now, 5 years later, she was the same. Silver hair neatly pinned, beige sweater, a faint trace of lavender perfume. I haven't forgotten, Lorraine, I said. I just thought I'd never need anyone from the courthouse again. She laughed softly, setting her bag on the wooden table and sitting across from me. And life laughs back, Judge. Never just means not yet. We sat in silence for a moment, only the sound of the wind through the pines and the smell of roasting coffee drifted from a neighbor's porch. Lorraine glanced around the small cabin, her eyes softening. So this is how you've lived these 5 years. Peaceful, but that kind of peace only comes from someone who's been through storms. I said quietly. I thought I'd withdrawn from it all. But it seems the past has a way of calling back. Serena, she's dragging me back into court, not as a judge, but as a defendant. Lorraine nodded, her gaze sharpening. She opened her bag and placed a dark leather file case on the table. I know. I read the news this morning. The headlines are everywhere. Real estate couple Hayes seek guardianship over former judge's estate. You're Atlanta's latest coffee shop gossip. I smirked. Rumors travel faster than justice, Lorraine. Rumors fade, she said, but evidence doesn't. That's why I brought these. She opened the case. Inside were old documents wrapped in plastic sleeves labeled 2015, Hayes Development Group Fraud Inquiry. I froze. Darius? The very same, Lorraine said, her tone hardening. Remember the land tender case in 2015? His company was suspected of falsifying valuation records and laundering money through subsidiary funds. It should have gone to prosecution, but the key witness, a bookkeeper named Angela Brooks, disappeared right before the hearing. Case shelved. But I'm kept copies. You once told me real records should never vanish. I opened the file. Darius Hayes' signature gleamed across a transfer contract. Attached were bank statements showing suspicious transactions and a memo. Witness missing, case on hold. I read line after line, a chill creeping up my spine. If this ever came out, I said, he'd lose everything. Not just that, Lorraine replied. It might make Serena finally see who her husband really is. But to do it, we have to play it right. I looked up. Her eyes caught the sunlight, bright and steady. What do you mean, play it right? Silence, she said. The same way you've done for 35 years. Georgia's one-party consent law still holds. I've had a few calls with Serena this past week. She wanted me to testify that you've shown signs of memory loss, that you forgot your last session in 2019. I agreed, pretended to anyway, and I recorded it. I stared. You recorded her legally? Perfectly legal, Lorraine said firmly. One-party consent. I was a participant. She thought she could buy me. She unlocked her phone and played a recording. Serena's voice came through cold and deliberate. Miss Beaumont, my father isn't lucid anymore. I just need you to confirm few details about his memory during retirement. You'll be well compensated. 50,000 cash. My hand tightened on the chair. Lorraine stopped the audio. She said more, but that's enough. Proof that their aim isn't protection, it's possession. I was silent for a long while, then said softly, Lorraine, do you realize what you've just set in motion? She looked straight at me. I do, but I also remember the man who taught me silence isn't weakness. It's when the evidence speaks for you. I looked out the window. The late sunlight turned the pines gold. The storm from last night hadn't left me, but something else was forming. Clarity. Here's what we'll do, I said slowly. I want you to back up every file on Darius's 2015 case, plus Serena's recording. Everything sealed, notarized, and temporarily submitted to an independent attorney. No media, no leaks, no press. Silent evidence, Lorraine said, a small smile crossing her lips. You haven't changed. No, I replied. This time, I'm not trying to judge anyone. I just want them to learn that some courts don't sit in law books. They live in memory. We both looked toward the yard where sunlight slanted through the trees. On the table between us, 2 half-empty cups of coffee framed a stack of old files, the yellowed pages glinting like blades in the dusk. I knew from that moment on the battle had turned. They had the press, reputation, and wealth. I had truth, a woman who'd stood beside me for 2 decades, and the quiet authority of a man who knew the law better than anyone still breathing in that courthouse. And in that silence, justice began to speak. The morning at Clayton Hill was still cold, a thin white fog blanketing the slope. I brewed coffee, opened the window, and let the light spill into the wooden room. On the table lay the 3 folders Lorraine had left behind. The 2015 fraud case, Serena's bribery recording, and Solomon's letter. They were fragments beginning to fuse into one single shape, the truth. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote 3 words. Phase 1, proof of mind. The next day I drove to Dr. Whitford's office in central Clayton County. He had once been a forensic psychologist for trials I presided over. Now retired, he ran a small clinic by Lake Oconee. He smiled when he saw me walk in. Elias, you look sharper than half the people still working at the courthouse. What brings you here for a medical report? Something simple, I said. A piece of paper saying my head still works. Whitford understood immediately. He ran a series of cognitive tests, from visual reflexes to memory recall and pattern recognition. After an hour, he removed his glasses and looked at me through the warm yellow lamplight. I've signed hundreds of assessments, he said, but never seen anyone this prepared. Elias, your mind's sharper than a scalpel. I'll write. Fit to testify and to manage a state independently. I shook his hand, feeling a weight lift from my chest. That report would be my first shield. Over the next 3 days, I called 12 former colleagues, judges, prosecutors, attorneys, clerks. Each signed a notarized affidavit. I affirm that Mr. Elias Vance is fully lucid, capable of communication, and maintains sound legal judgment. The 12 statements were sealed, numbered from 1 to 12, and placed in a folder labeled Exhibit A, Capacity Proof. Lorraine helped deliver everything to the Clayton County Notary Office. She worked quietly, every stamp precise. When she was done, she looked at me, a thin smile forming. The shield is built. Now we need the blade. I nodded. The blade's already here. Serena's recording from last night is enough to unlock the door they thought was sealed. I've copied it to 2 USB drives, she said. One stays here, one sent to an independent lawyer in Savannah. Just as you said, silent but ready. I nodded again. Good. Now we take it all for authentication. That afternoon, I went to the office of District Attorney Harold Denton in downtown Atlanta. He had once been a student in my ethics seminar 20 years ago. When I entered, Harold stood, shook my hand, and looked genuinely moved. Judge, I read the papers. It's hard to believe they'd do this to you. I placed the silver USB on his desk. I need you to verify this recording and the related documents. Everything was obtained legally. Georgia's a one-party consent state. Harold played the first few seconds, his brows knitting as Serena's voice filled the room. Ms. Beaumont, I'll send $50,000 in cash. I just need confirmation my father's been forgetful. When it ended, Harold exhaled slowly and signed a certification of authenticity. I'll seal the original with the DA's office. This is fully admissible evidence if the guardianship case reaches court. I only need one copy, I said. Keep the original. No one must know it exists until it's time. Harold nodded. Understood. When it's revealed, it'll go off like fireworks in the courtroom. I smiled faintly. I don't need fireworks, Harold. Just light. That night, Clayton Hill was silent. I arranged every file on the desk. 1. Exhibit A, capacity proof, 12 notarized statements. 2. Exhibit B, bribery attempt, Serena's recording DA certified. 3. Exhibit C, Darius fraud, 2015, files from Lorraine. All placed inside a metal box labeled Silent Evidence, private record. I locked it, set it behind the bookshelf safe, and wrote in my notebook, March 17th, defense complete. Now we wait for their strike. Lorraine asked, Aren't you afraid they'll realize you're preparing? I answered, voice low but steady. The greedy always believe they're smarter than everyone else. That's why they lose to evidence. She laughed softly and poured another cup of coffee. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, carrying the scent of damp soil and mist. I looked at my reflection in the window, an old man, eyes still bright, hands still steady. I whispered, Let's begin, Solomon. Your lesson, justice before gold. It's time to return it. And in the quiet wooden room, the clock on the wall ticked steadily, each beat sounding like an oath. Justice was ready to speak. Serena's message arrived Thursday morning, short and precise. Pop, I know things have been tense lately. I want to make peace. Tonight at 7, our house. I'll cook your favorite meal. I stared at those words for a long time. Every sentence was polite, tidy and hollow, the kind of politeness that masks deceit, the kind only a man who's judged liars all his life could recognize. I didn't reply. An hour later, Lorraine called. You're going, aren't you, Judge? Of course. To catch a liar, you let them finish the lie. That evening, Atlanta was painted in pale violet dusk. I drove to Buckhead, where the marble-white mansion still shone like a mirror of vanity. The gate was open. Warm yellow light spilled from the porch, and faint jazz floated through the air. Serena waited at the door, a tight smile, a glass of wine in hand. Pop, I'm glad you came. You invited, I came. The smell of roast chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air. The same meal Martha, her mother, used to make every Sunday night. Not a coincidence. Darius stepped out from the kitchen, buttoning his vest, his voice smooth like velvet over steel. "Pop, no business tonight, just dinner. Family, right?" I nodded and sat at the end of the table. On the ceiling I caught a faint red blink, a security camera. My old instincts told me this dinner wasn't meant for just 3 people. Serena poured wine and said softly, "I know I was wrong to say what I said, but you have to understand, these days, honor without money is like bringing a wooden sword to war." I looked her in the eyes. "Did you just call honor a wooden sword?" "I'm just being honest," she said, her tone rising. "Honor doesn't pay bills." Darius joined in, his thin smile never touching his eyes. "Pop, you're smart but stubborn. Everyone says you knew the law better than anyone when you worked the bench. But those days are gone. The law doesn't live in books anymore. It lives in bank accounts." I set my knife down, looked at neither of them, and spoke slowly. "Thank you for dinner, but I have to say this before dessert. I heard everything." Both froze. Serena's smile twisted, her voice breaking half a note. "What are you talking about?" "The night at Marble House, after dinner last time, when you thought I was asleep upstairs. Every word. If he doesn't sign, we'll make the court force him to. Justice is only for people who don't know how to make money." I paused, looking straight at her. "I don't need to prove what you said. The camera in my head recorded enough." The air thickened. The cutlery went still. Darius leaned forward, trying to smirk. "You're imagining things, Pop. You don't have any evidence." "Maybe not. But sometimes people don't need evidence to expose themselves. All they need is to hear their own words in the right place, at the right time." Serena suddenly stood up, her wine glass tipped, spilling across the white tablecloth, spreading a red stain like a wound. "You always talk about honor, about justice, about things nobody cares about anymore," she shouted, tears streaking her face. "Honor is worthless. You hear me? Worthless. Mom died, and you clung to your precious justice more than to this family." The words echoed through the room. Darius went silent. The wall clock ticked between the stillness. I didn't look at her. I picked up my napkin, wiped my hands, and rose. "If honor were truly worthless, you wouldn't have tried so hard to steal it from me." Serena staggered back, eyes glassy. I walked to the door, my hand brushing the photo frame hanging by the exit. Their wedding picture. I looked at it for a few seconds, then spoke just loud enough for the camera to catch. "Justice doesn't shout, Serena. It only waits for the fog to lift." I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The night wind carried the smell of wine, chicken, and tears. Behind me, Darius's voice came low, trembling. "Turn the camera off." But too late. The red light still blinked, capturing it all. Every word, every sob, every moment my daughter sentenced herself with her own tongue. I descended the steps. Rain began to fall, soft at first. No one saw me out. No apology, no plea. Just the click of a closing door, cold and final. I didn't look back, because I knew that inside that marble white house, what they had just lost wasn't money. It was dignity. And that is the most expensive price anyone can pay. Dawn in Atlanta flared behind the skyline like a thin red wound across the gray clouds. Dew gathered on the rows of parked cars outside the Fulton County Courthouse. I stood by the curb, straightening the collar of my faded denim shirt, brushing the front with one hand. In the other, I held my old straw hat, the same one I wore tending the garden back at Clayton Hill. Lorraine had told me to wear a suit. I shook my head. "No need," I said. "They need to see a farmer. I just need them to hear the truth." Lorraine smiled faintly, carrying the black case beside me. Inside were the 3 files we had spent weeks preparing. Exhibit A, capacity proof. Exhibit B, bribery recording. And Exhibit C, Darius Fraud, 2015. On the courthouse steps, local reporters were already waiting. A cameraman wore a badge marked WSB TV Live. The lens followed every step I took. A microphone extended toward me, and the "yeah." Reporter's voice cut clear through the noise. "Mr. Vance, any comment on your daughter and son-in-law seeking guardianship over you?" I paused half a second, looking straight into the camera. "No, I'm here to listen. But write this correctly. Justice doesn't need defense. It just needs light." Lorraine squeezed my arm gently, whispering, "It's live, Judge." I nodded. On the sidelines, a few onlookers murmured, "That's the old man?" "Yeah, they say he's lost it. Still hoarding his money." "Look at him. Denim shirt in court. He's definitely senile." I didn't respond. My boots echoed on the old stone floor, steady beneath the buzz of reporters and flashing lights. Inside, Courtroom 3 was cold and bright. I sat at the defendant's table. Lorraine set the case beside me, checking each file once more. Serena and Darius were already there, seated on the petitioner's side. Darius wore a gray suit, his face smug with rehearsed sympathy. Serena avoided my eyes, but a new gold watch gleamed on her wrist. On the bench above us, Judge Preston Ellis entered. Everyone rose. He was a few years older than me, hair silver, posture slightly bent. When he looked toward the petitioner's table, then up at me, his mouth stopped mid-sentence. His hand trembled over the docket. He read the first line aloud, then froze, eyes widening as they landed on Respondent, Elias Vance, former Chief Judge, Fulton County, Retty. The air shifted. The hum of the crowd fell silent. Preston stepped back half a pace, still staring at me. His voice rasped, "My God, it's him!" The whisper spread, and then vanished. The gallery went still. Only the live TV cameras clicked softly. Serena lifted her head, confusion flickering across her face. Preston inhaled, set the gavel down, and spoke again. His tone changed from procedural to reverent. "Today's hearing concerns the guardianship petition of Ms. Serena Hayes over her father, Mr. Elias Vance. However, before we begin, the court must confirm the respondent's identity. Mr. Vance, please stand." I rose slowly. Every pair of eyes followed. Lorraine nodded subtly. I removed my straw hat and placed it on the table. "I am Elias Vance. I served 35 years on the Fulton County bench, the last 10 as Chief Judge. I appear today not to defend property, but to defend the dignity of a man who still believes in the justice of this state." A quiet gasp rippled through the back rows. Serena's eyes widened. Darius went pale, his lips moving soundlessly. Preston steadied himself, tapping the gavel lightly. "Court will maintain order." But no one spoke. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The WSB TV lens panned slowly across the courtroom, capturing an old man in denim, standing tall and unshaken, eyes bright, posture unbent, his straw hat resting on the table like a symbol of plain truth and resolve. Reporters whispered, "That's him, the real Chief Judge. Vance? The one from the landmark, ruling in 2009. "Unbelievable." Preston looked at me for a long moment, then murmured quietly, just for me to hear, "Elias, if you're the defendant, this court may need to judge itself." I gave a faint smile. "No, Preston, I'm not here to judge anyone. I'm here to remind them justice never retires." The room was so silent that the first drops of rain against the windows sounded like falling pins. The ceiling light glinted off the polished bench, catching Serena's face, where her confident smile had already vanished. Darius flipped through papers with shaking hands. The live stream continued. The camera zoomed on me as comments flooded the feed. "It's him, the retired Chief Judge Vance. That's the man Darius Hayes called senile. They filed guardianship against the guy who taught half this courthouse the law." Preston straightened, voice firm again. "The court will proceed, but all will maintain decorum." I nodded, taking my seat. Lorraine opened the case and drew the first folder, Exhibit A, Capacity Proof. 12 notarized statements aligned like bricks in a wall. The gavel struck 3 times. "Court is now in session." The sound cracked through the room, sharp and final. And I knew then this was no mere guardianship hearing. This was justice itself returning to the bench. The studio lights glared in my face. I didn't flinch. I simply lifted my head, spine straight, eyes fixed on the bench. Outside, the murmurs of the crowd still swelled. But inside, one sound prevailed, the silence. And that silence belonged to me. Because in that silence, all of Atlanta was witnessing one undeniable truth. The man they called the senile old fool was in fact the very symbol of justice they once revered. The Atlanta morning rain had stopped, leaving a pale sunlight seeping through the courthouse windows. The air inside the courtroom was dense, heavy enough for everyone to hear the person beside them breathe. Preston tapped the gavel softly. "Mr. Vance, do you have legal representation?" I stood, my voice calm. "No, Your Honor. I will represent myself." The room stirred. Several reporters raised their cameras higher. Keyboards clattered like hail. Preston looked at me, his eyes caught between concern and disbelief. "You're sure, Elias?" "I am," I said, "because this is not a trial about property. It is a trial about ethics, and ethics can only be defended by oneself." I stepped to the center of the room, standing under the overhead light. Behind me, Lorraine opened the briefcase and pulled out a file. I looked up at the bench and spoke slowly, clearly enough for all to hear. 30 years ago, when I served in this same courthouse, there was a case that nearly collapsed the entire system. A corporation tried to bribe me with $50,000 to alter a ruling. The man who uncovered that bribe is the same man presiding over this court today, Judge Preston Ellis. The courtroom went silent. Preston hesitated, then gave a slight nod. I continued. "I refused the money. I turned over all the evidence to Mr. Ellis, and he was the one who signed the indictment. That case ended with a 20-year prison sentence for the man who offered the bribe. I still remember what Preston said that day. A judge only needs to sell his honor once to lose it for life." I turned my eyes to Serena. Today, 30 years later, I hear the same number again. $50,000. Only this time not from a case, but from my own daughter. Serena's face drained of color. Darius froze like stone. Preston leaned forward, voice hoarse. "Mr. Vance, do you have proof?" I nodded. Lorraine stepped forward and placed a silver USB on the table. "A legal recording," I said, "captured in Georgia with consent from one party, Mrs. Lorraine Beaumont." Lorraine pressed play. Serena's voice filled the courtroom. "Mrs. Beaumont, just confirm my father forgets things. I'll send $50,000 in cash as thanks." The sound echoed against the stone walls. No one breathed. A reporter dropped her pen. It clattered sharply on the floor. Serena lowered her head, hands trembling, tears streaming. Preston closed his eyes, gripping the gavel handle tightly. I spoke again. I never wanted to release that recording, but sometimes silence means complicity, and I have been silent long enough. I nodded at Lorraine. She opened another folder, Exhibit C, Darius Fraud, 2015. Contracts, signatures, and bank reports appeared on the projection screen. My voice was steady. "This is the 2015 fraud case from Hayes Development. It was closed because a key witness vanished. But now it returns, along with the man behind it, sitting right there, calling himself the one who keeps his father-in-law's investments safe." Darius jumped up. "You have no right to use sealed files." "You're wrong," I replied. "This is a certified duplicate from the Administrative Records Office, and I was the judge who ordered that case sealed." The room erupted in gasps. A reporter whispered, "Judge turns tables in courtroom." Preston pounded his gavel, but even he couldn't mask his emotion. "The court will maintain order," he said, then looked at me. "Continue, Mr. Vance." I took a breath, my tone low but firm. "People can take my money, my status, or my name, but no one can take what I've protected for 40 years, the dignity of justice itself. I didn't come here to win, but to remind everyone that honor is not an outdated idea. It is the last pillar keeping humanity from turning into beasts." I stopped, and looked down the row at Serena. Tears streaked her face, her head bowed, shoulders trembling. Darius avoided Preston's gaze, biting his lip until it bled. Preston slowly rose, his voice quiet yet ringing like a bronze bell. "Mr. Vance, this court thanks you for reminding us why the law exists." He struck the gavel 3 times, ending the hearing. Outside, reporters surged forward as the courtroom doors swung open. On WSB-TV's live feed, the headlines flashed across the screen. Retired Chief Judge defends himself, turns the case upside down. Honor is priceless. Elias Vance's words shake the nation. Citizens gathered on the courthouse steps, applauding as I stepped out. One reporter called out, "Mr. Vance, do you think you've won?" I stopped, smiled faintly, and replied in a deep, steady voice, "I didn't come to win. I came to prove that honor, when attacked, can still stand." Lorraine walked beside me, pride glinting in her eyes. Behind us, Preston still stood framed in the courthouse doorway, watching me as if seeing a ghost from the past return. The Atlanta sky cleared, sunlight broke through in golden streaks, and in that moment I knew justice had not only been heard, it had been seen. The hearing was over, but the moral verdict had just begun to echo in everyone's hearts. The Atlanta afternoon sun sank low across the courthouse windows, casting faint golden streaks over the gray stone floor. The Fulton courtroom remained packed. Reporters crowded the hallway, flashes bursting through frosted glass. Preston stepped to the bench, holding a nearly 200-page judgment. His face was calm, but his eyes still carried the weight of the morning's defense. Fulton County Court, Civil Hearing, number 24C3186, concerning the petition for legal guardianship over Mr. Elias Vance. After reviewing all evidence, medical evaluations, and testimonies, the court rules. He paused, glanced at Serena, voice lowering. "The petition for guardianship is fully denied." A ripple of gas spread through the room. Serena looked up, face white. Darius clutched her hand, but his own trembled. Preston struck his gavel 3 times to calm the noise before continuing. Furthermore, the court finds sufficient grounds to forward the case to the Fulton County Prosecutor's Office for investigation into 2 matters. 1, attempted bribery of a potential witness by petitioner Serena Hayes, and 2, financial fraud involving Hayes Development Group, represented by Mr. Darius Hayes. The room exploded. Reporters near the door leapt to their phones. Serena let out a sharp cry and collapsed back into her seat. Darius shot up, shouting, "What? You can't do that. This is a civil hearing. You have no right to investigate me." Preston looked at him, voice cold as steel. "The court has the authority to refer a case when criminal indicators are found. And if you raise your voice again, Mr. Hayes, I will have the bailiff remove you." "This is that old man's trick," Darius yelled, pointing at me, face burning red. "He manipulated everything. You fraud." The bailiff grabbed his arm. Preston slammed the gavel. "Mr. Hayes, leave the courtroom immediately." Chairs screeched. Darius struggled as he was escorted out, still shouting, "We'll countersue. We'll—" The door slammed. Silence returned. Serena sat trembling, hands shaking, tears streaking her cheeks. Preston looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly, not as a judge, but as a father. "Ms. Hayes, this court does not judge you for being a daughter, but I hope you understand. Honor is not a loan you repay with money." Serena bowed her head, sobbing quietly. No one else spoke. Preston raised the gavel once more, his voice resonant. "This hearing is adjourned." The doors opened. A wave of people and light flooded in. Reporters surged forward, microphones outstretched, cameras flashing down the hall. Lorraine followed close behind me, clutching the evidence case. Preston stood in the doorway, watching as though sending off an old brother. Flashes went off in rapid bursts. Voices shouted over each other. "Mr. Vance, how do you feel about your victory? Is it true your own daughter betrayed you? Do you plan to file charges, sir?" I stopped at the courthouse steps. The afternoon wind swept through, carrying dry sunlight and dust. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. A WSB TV reporter, live on camera, spoke in a trembling voice. "You're witnessing history. Former Fulton Chief Judge Elias Vance has just defended himself and won the guardianship trial, filed by his own daughter. The bribery recording has shocked the public. The hashtag #DaughterCriesInCourt is now trending across Atlanta." In the video background, Serena was seen crying, mascara running, being helped out by court staff, while Darius was held by police outside, still cursing amid flashing cameras. It had all become a live broadcast, a tragedy of greed and pride. Lorraine looked at me and asked softly, "You really won't say anything, Judge? The press is waiting." I shook my head, my voice low, weary but steady. "No, they've heard enough noise. Now let justice speak." I placed the straw hat on my head and stepped down the stairs. The sunset blazed across the courtyard, gold and fierce as fire. Cameras still followed, but I didn't look back. Each step echoed like the closing latch of a door, the door of the past. Behind me came the noise of reporters and murmuring crowds, but in my mind only Solomon's old words remained. "Justice doesn't shout, Elias. It only waits for the fog to lift." I passed through the courthouse gate. The last light of day rested on my faded denim shoulders, quiet as an old glory returning home. There was no music, no triumph, only silence, the one sound worthy of restored honor. And in that silence, Atlanta saw it clearly. A father who didn't need to defeat his daughter with words, but with truth. 2 months after the trial, Atlanta had grown quiet. The media storm faded, leaving behind only old headlines that read, "Former Fulton Chief Judge defends himself, wins back his honor." But in Clayton Hill, my mornings remained the same. The sound of roosters, the smell of coffee on the old gas stove, and the first rays of sunlight through the cabin window brought back the life I had always chosen, simple and honest as breathing. That morning, the mailman delivered a sealed envelope from the court. I opened it. Inside was the final confirmation. All of Solomon Vance's estate was officially transferred to me, reappraised at $2,800,000. A large number, yet as I looked at the line, executor, Elias Vance, all I felt was weight. Solomon once said, "Money is a means, not a purpose." And now I had to keep that promise. I drove to Solomon's old house on the outskirts of Marietta, the place where he had spent his final years. The red brick home sat quietly amid its garden, elms arching their branches over the driveway. When I opened the door, the scent of wood and old books filled the air. The living room was untouched, his armchair, the wall of legal texts, and a portrait of us taken when I had just been sworn in as judge. On the desk lay a yellowed envelope, the corner labeled in his handwriting, "For Elias, when you're ready." I opened it and read each line slowly. "Brother, if you're reading this, I've likely gone. I didn't leave you money to keep. It's to do what we once dreamed. Bring law back to those who can't afford to buy it. Turn this house into a place where justice requires no appointment, where the poor can walk in without fearing the fee." I folded the letter carefully. My chest felt heavy, but brightened with each breath. The idea caught fire in me. 3 weeks later, I was working with a group of young attorneys from Emory and 2 of my old colleagues. The house began its transformation. I kept the structure intact. The living room became the legal consultation hall. The library turned into the casework office, and the second floor into a space where law students trained for free. At the front gate, we replaced the old plaque with a new brass. One engraved, "Solomon Vance Legal Aid Center. Justice is not a privilege, it is a right." On opening day, WSB-TV came to film. The reporter interviewed me in the garden as sunlight spilled over the freshly painted roof. "Mr. Vance, why not sell the house and retire? Why take on this work instead?" I smiled gently, speaking slowly and clearly. Because justice doesn't rest. As long as I'm breathing, I still owe my brother a promise. The broadcast aired that evening, me in a pale blue shirt, standing before the brass sign, and the first comment read, "A man returning justice to the place that once lost it." Meanwhile, across the city, Serena was sweeping floors at a women's shelter in Decatur, sweat beaded on her forehead, her community service volunteer uniform clinging to her back. 8 hours a day, wiping tables, sorting papers, filing custody petitions for single mothers. At noon, she paused and glanced at the wall-mounted TV, showing a report on the Solomon Vance Legal Aid Center. There I was on screen, cutting the ribbon. The reporter's voice said, "Former Chief Judge Elias Vance has dedicated the full $2,800,000 inheritance from his late brother to open a free legal center. He also donated $100,000 to create the Law Students Fellowship at Emory University, aiding low-income students pursuing public law." She froze. The name Vance hung in the air like a bell toll. A middle-aged black woman beside her touched her shoulder and smiled. "You know, that center helped my lawyer get my daughter back. That man's a good soul." Serena bowed her head, eyes glistening. She couldn't bring herself to say she was his daughter. That evening, when I returned to Clayton Hill, Lorraine sat on the porch with 2 law students from Emory. She handed me a stack of papers. 3 weeks, Judge. 23 cases already assisted. A woman fired unfairly. A veteran scammed out of his home, and a student forced into an exploitative contract. They all thank you. I smiled, resting my hand on the files. Don't thank me. Thank Solomon. If he were alive, he'd do this 100 times better. Lorraine nodded softly, gazing toward the garden. The evening sun angled through the trees, glinting off the brass plaque. She whispered, "I think he's watching from somewhere, and I think he's proud." I stayed quiet, watching that last streak of light fade behind the elms. Inside, something finally settled. Not anger, but peace. The peace of a promise kept. And out there, amid the vast city, a daughter was beginning her own path to redemption. And I knew, perhaps for the first time in years, she was learning what the word justice truly meant. A year had passed since Preston's gavel last struck. Atlanta had moved on, busy, shining, unaware that in the quiet suburb of Marietta, the red brick house of Solomon still opened its doors each day under the name Solomon Vance Legal Aid Center. That morning, the center buzzed with laughter and footsteps. It was expansion day, 2 new consultation rooms, a law student training wing, and a fund for victims of financial fraud. Lorraine stood in the foyer, her silver hair gleaming under the light as she held the volunteer registry. Preston, now honorary chief judge of Fulton County, spoke to the press. "I was once his student. Elias Vance didn't just win a case. He restored faith in an entire system." On the front steps, I sat beneath the elms with a cup of coffee. A spring breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the fence. A worn sedan stopped by the gate, and Serena stepped out. White shirt, jeans, no jewelry, no trace of the polished attorney she once was. Just a daughter learning how to stand in the light again. She smiled softly. "Pop, I'm late." "No," I said, shifting aside. "Justice doesn't keep time. It waits for those brave enough to return." We sat in silence a while. Voices of students drifted from the new classroom. She glanced around the garden, her tone small but steady. "Every time I come here, I feel like I can breathe again. I'm rebuilding, Pop. At the Women's Center, I help them file for custody, divorce, appeals. I send the cases here for help. I want to work at the center. No pay. Just a chance." I looked at her and nodded. "There's always a chance, Serena. The road home never turns off its light." She smiled through her tears, quickly wiping them away. Midway through the ceremony, Preston stepped into the courtyard, holding a sealed document bearing the seal of the Northern District Court of Georgia. His voice turned solemn. I have an announcement regarding the Hayes development case, an extension of the investigation initiated by our center. The crowd hushed. Preston read slowly. Defendant Darius Hayes is sentenced to 3 years in prison without parole on 2 counts: organized financial fraud and conspiracy to bribe a state official. All assets involved are forfeited to the Georgia Victim Restitution Fund. Murmurs rippled through the audience as cameras clicked. Serena stood still beside me, her eyes wide. Preston continued. The verdict also notes that the original evidence from last year's guardianship case initiated the investigation, and the first provider of that evidence was Mr. Elias Vance. I rose and said quietly, "No, Your Honor. Justice defends itself. I only opened the door for it to walk through." Serena's face bore the soft lines of time, her eyes clear now, filled with gratitude. "Pop," she whispered, "I'm not happy he's in prison, but I know it's what had to happen. Thank you for not letting someone else's sin bury me forever." I rested my hand on her shoulder. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you can face the wound without letting it define what comes next. By evening, the crowd thinned. Lorraine stood on the porch. Preston posed for photos with the Emory students, and Serena and I remained beneath the elms, where sunlight stretched long across the grass. She opened her notebook, where the old letter from Solomon was tucked inside. "Turn this house into a place where justice requires no appointment." She read it once more, then closed it gently. "I understand now, Pop. Justice isn't something you say. It's something you do, every day." "And you will," I said, voice soft but sure. "You've learned the worth of honor. Now use it to protect others." From the gate, the center's lights flicked on, casting a golden glow across the brass sign. "Justice is not a privilege." Serena leaned her head against my shoulder. The city lights of Atlanta shimmered beyond, reflected in the windows like 1,000 small stars. I whispered, half to myself, half to the sky. "Solomon, we did it. The house still shines. Justice still has a home." The night wind carried the scent of jasmine through the porch. Preston and Lorraine stood quietly by the steps, watching father and daughter beneath the mingling of light and shadow. I closed my eyes and smiled, a circle complete, not through verdicts, but through forgiveness. I once believed justice lived only in courtrooms, within gavels and decrees, but near the end of my life, I finally understood. True justice lives in how you rise when your own blood tries to knock you down. I didn't win through anger. I never needed to shout to prove I was right. I simply let truth speak for itself, and silence become my weapon. Tonight, as the reflection of Atlanta's lights glows upon the brass plaque bearing my brother's name, I know I've kept my promise to turn pain into purpose and betrayal into a lesson for the next generation. If you've ever been underestimated, ever betrayed by someone you loved, remember this: justice doesn't need to shout to be heard. It only needs someone brave enough to hold on to dignity until the very end. Leave a single dot. If you believe truth always finds its way home. And if you believe dignity never goes out of style, hit subscribe. Because I still have stories to tell, stories where silence becomes the verdict, and kindness becomes the most beautiful sentence ever given to those who forgot what it means to be human.